Namaste. Welcome to Smriti. And today in our series of Smriti Talks, we have Dr. Prasad Kaipa. Welcome, Prasad. You've been my mentor, and this is something very special, meeting in Smriti. And definitely, I'm so eager to hear your story yet again, and I want to share your story with our Smriti viewers particularly. Prasad, in his journey spanning decades, has been an author, a leadership coach, and researcher. Amidst changing roles, the constant in his life has been a desire to delve deeper into the essence and sensibility. This essence has been shaped by other roles he has played, like those of a father, brother, and husband, a friend, mentor, you can go on. Prasad has been bringing Indian Vedic wisdom into management theory and practice for over 3 decades. Just like the Japanese contribution to management and manufacturing, he believes Indian wisdom can contribute to change management, leadership development, employee engagement, and motivation. And he has been successful in coming up with frameworks, processes, and workshops that benefited a larger number of organizations, executives, individuals, in addition to business students. Mapping cognitive and neurological models along with Vedic wisdom in particular and management principles allows for true integration of science, spirituality, and business, and that is Dr. Prasad's deep interest. I can go on. There is so much that I can share, but please visit the website. I have his full bio, smriti.upaasana.net. Well, I'll take a pause here and we'll come back to the context why we are here today. Smriti is here, sitting with great scholars, friends, and mentors, discussing the age-old, ageless wisdom, reminiscing and cherishing the body of knowledge, and thinking out loud how it has helped and is helping and will help in future, shaping our lives. I believe in personal stories. They make a bigger impact on acquiring knowledge and much more in so many avenues of our lives. I would like you to share your story, particularly integrating our objective of Smriti, the Vedic body of knowledge, Vedic wisdom. You can start off from your early life and how it has shaped to now, the present moment. So please.
Sure. Thank you very much, Vani. It's a pleasure talking to you. And the way in which I got connected with Vedas and Vedantas and our Hindu way of life probably started very early for me for 2-3 things. I used to go to my grandparents' homes in Kadiri in Anantapur district, and it had a very famous, and it continues to have obviously a very famous temple of Sri Lakshmi Swami, and that was very close to my house, like maybe about 250 to 300 feet away, and it had a large open area in the pranganam, and where I used to play and where we used to literally spend time with other kids. And there was a procession in the morning and in the evening where there was a huge bell. The bell, which is about probably 3 to 4 feet in size, a huge iron bell. And then you sit underneath that to a certain extent, and you are supposed to ring that bell for about 10 to 15 minutes. During the time there is a particular ritual that happened where the priests go out to other side of the road and then spend some time offering some prayers and food to another god who is supposed to be like a doorkeeper, and then come back. And there used to be number of people who used to compete for a chance, both in the morning and evening, to ring that bell, because it was like amazing sound, and it used to test my endurance and patience to be able to continually ring that bell for 10, 15, sometimes 20 minutes. So pretty much I used to spend a lot of time in temple waiting for the exact time that the priests go out, and that's when whoever is available there will get the opportunity. Mm-hmm. So I ended up spending time, and then I also looked for, before that, to go inside the temple when they were doing various prayers, whether it is Narayana Suktam, or whether it is Purusha Suktam, or whether it is, variety of prayers and a variety of pujas as they were offering. I ended up sitting there and reciting some of the various mantras and learning them and enjoying my time there. So that was more about, I think at a very early age, I suppose you can say it was not intellectually engaging with Vedanta, but it was more getting embedded into rituals and into bhakti to a certain extent. I would say bhakti for me at that time was fun, enjoyment, and a certain pride to be able to recite Purusha Suktam with them, with the intonation, with appropriate ways of singing it. So it was a joy, and that's how I got engaged very early. And in addition to that, I was also, for example, sent to a teacher who was between my house and the temple. There was a teacher with whom I was learning Amarakosam and learning the various Sanskrit related stuff which are appropriate for me to learn. And then the priest's children, they used to sit outside, and then they used to learn whatever they need to learn for Abhishekam, or they needed to learn whatever. If I want to play with them, the only way I could do that was I could sit with them, I could recite with them, I could actually teach some of it so that they will complete the task which they need to complete. Then I can talk to their parents, the priests, and then we all could go and play and do whatever other things we want to do. So that my childhood induction into spirituality, if I might call, was much more through joy, through fun, through engagement, and through responsibility, and learning what I can do to contribute. So that is how I got inducted into the rituals and the learning the Vedas and learning some of the various paths.
Oh, that is so wonderful. It is so nice to hear. I could relate, and especially the fun part. It makes so much sense. And so this is the state of Andhra Pradesh that you grew up and all these experiences happened. Very nice. And how about your family? How did they shape you in the Vedic journey?
My father lost his parents when he was 10 months old. Mm-hmm. And he only had an elder brother who was 2 years of age at that time when he was 10 months old, when both of them lost their both mother and father on the same day. And so they were separated. And then my uncle essentially became a Veda Pandit because he grew up learning Vedas and he becoming a priest. And my father went through regular education and he became an accountant in the state electricity board. And because he was also into photography, he was connected with the temple. So when there is an opportunity for him to influence the temple authorities that they need a Veda Pandit in addition to the priests. So my uncle got a job as a Veda Pandit, reciting Vedas, morning and evening in the Lakshmi Swami temple. So that gave me an opportunity for me to learn some of the things from family. And as I mentioned earlier, from the early childhood, my father was very interested in me also uh, paying attention to the roots, learning the Vedanta Upanishads and the Veda, some of the mantras and some other things like that. A typical Orthodox Brahmin family. Uh, that's how I was actually studying some of these things from maybe when I was 3, 4, 5. And later, when I moved to Anantapur, around when I was, I think, like 11 or 12, I was sent to a Sanskritam teacher called Subramanya Shastri. So I went to him every morning from 7 to 8, pretty much till I was 20. For about next 8 years, I used to go to Sanskritam teacher every single day to learn and pass the Sanskritam exams. And then he was already in his 60s, maybe late 60s by the time. So spend time with him, help him with whatever other things that were going on. He was having a residence in the pranganam of a Shiva temple. Shiva and Rama temples were there. And so we used to sit in the temple premises and then learn whatever I needed to learn, the lesson for the day, or prepare for the Sanskritam exams, or whatever I was learning in school, it was going to be reinforced in the class. And my father also insisted that I should take Sanskritam as a next language extra, in addition to Telugu and English. As a third language, either I could choose Hindi or Sanskritam. So I ended up taking Sanskritam as my third language. Okay. So till my undergrad, where I had two languages, Telugu and Sanskritam. So I studied Sanskritam for almost completing the college. Only when I went to the masters, even though I had a Sanskritam teacher teaching me, but in the college, I did not learn Sanskritam. So this was my path, essentially learning to understand and appreciate what it means to learn Deva Bhasha, or the Indian mother tongue, if you want to call, because each state has its own mother tongue, like Telugu or Kannada or Gujarati or Hindi. But for the entire country, if you were to look at, the mother tongue of the country was Sanskritam, and I got inducted into it in the early life.
Such an enriched life you led, and what a blessed, you had all this, the induction of the Vedic, not just the knowledge, but also the lifestyle. You lived it, and you really experienced and touched it very close, and you're very fortunate that way. So how did it travel further into your college days then?
When I came to college, especially when I was in my master's, I went through what you might call a critical thinking period. And I began to be influenced by variety of forces, whether it was politics, whether it was communism. And at that time, there were lots of protests regarding what you might call a Hindi movement. There was a lot about variety of things that were taking place, and I got quite a bit influenced by them. And then essentially I was thinking for myself regarding gods and godmen and the spirituality. I was studying physics. In some respects, I began to really look at it and say, does spirituality and does Sanskritam and do the Vedas and all the spiritual traditions, do they actually inform me? Do they connect me to what's going on in the world? And so I went through several phases where I was agnostic, and then there were several times I was an atheist and I didn't believe in any of the things, and I rebelled against everything. And then I started looking at uh, what would it be if the world doesn't have the divine, and what if all these things are just mythology and they don't have any connection to reality? What if all of these are actually stories that are created by men to men, humanity, I mean, in terms of giving us the morals and ethics, but they are not truth. They are actually created. God is the, you might call, medicine that human beings have created to bring some ethical code into humanity. So I've gone through quite a bit of that, and I had intense conversations with some of my friends. I had classmates. There was my classmate, one lady called Lakshmi, and Lakshmi was really, really follower of Swami Sathya Sai Baba, Puttaparthi Sai Baba. And her family actually left Delhi where they used to live, and her father, who was a pretty famous scientist and who was a director of a huge international institute, he left all that to become a principal of a Sathya Sai Baba Women's College in Anantapur. And so his daughter, Lakshmi, my classmate, and not only him, but also his children, myself, we used to have large number of conversations regarding spirituality, God, the role at that time, 20th century, when what you might call the transistors were becoming famous at that time. So I used to have large conversations regarding physics and science and spirituality and each of their roles. So it was pretty thought-provoking, turbulent, and I believe that I learned a lot more by stepping away from straight belief and completely coming from a conservative orthodox frame of reference to questioning, challenging, thinking for myself, and examining whatever has been told and internalizing it for myself. So you might say, like manthan or mathanam was taking place quite a bit. And churning took place for a long period of time, almost till about the mid-1980s. So I didn't believe necessarily that religion and spirituality, I felt they were more addictions to human being rather than useful medicines for that matter.
Okay. Oh, thank you for sharing. I'm very happy that not many would share this side, but it came out very well. And I would like to, I would have asked more questions, especially what were the things that came out of your churning, as you mentioned. But just moving on and keeping to the context of our episode today here. So you traveled till college, and I'm sure at some juncture, I don't know whether you still carried this thought process into your career as well. And I think, please, if you can proceed further into the journey.
Sure. I think after my college, I went to IIT for a PhD. There again, my beliefs in science got much more reinforced. And while I was open to go to temple, I was open to go spend some time, but it was curiosity rather than, you might call, devotion. And I was I had a close friend, one Jagdish, with whom we used to go every Sunday to a temple which was on the IIT Madras premises. But he was very devoted. But I just went because we both did that as a ritual, and I was with him. While I was connecting sometimes to the prayers or Abhishekam or some of that, but it was more of an intellectual curiosity than the fun and the devotion that I had in the early childhood. So I began to believe that the physics is to a certain extent the binding force that helps me to understand how universe works, because that is about frameworks, and that's about models, and that's about equations.
Yeah.
So even after my PhD, when I came to United States, I was in University of Utah, first as a postdoctoral fellow, and then I was an assistant professor in the medical school in the University of Utah, doing the medical physics. Even at that time, for several years, I began to think about the way in which sciences connect the universe in the external world. And while I was interested in the internal world, while I did look at transformation and I went through some programs that allowed me to examine the internal world, it was more from a, spiritual little bit, but never necessarily be connected with devotion, never necessarily be connected with God or Vedanta, till I came to Apple Computer. When I was a fellow at Apple University, and I was actually researching how people learn, how people think, how people collaborate, how people create. And when I've been researching these elements, I began to really look at a lot more brain research, lot more trying to understand from some of these. But I think when I was deeply believing that we could solve the mysteries of human development and human learning and human motivation from understanding the brain, from understanding psychology, from understanding philosophy, I had another opportunity in 1989 to go back to India to attend a conference called Business of Business is Learning. And there, when I was in the conference, some of the wonderful people, Shashi Khanna, Harrison Owen, Ann Stadler, some of the people who were in there, and the Indian friends like Anil Sachdev, V.S. Mahesh, H.N. Srinivas, some of these people truly kind of started challenging me about brain versus mind, and how much do we really know from the brain perspective versus how much do we really know from the yoga perspective. So they started saying, what do we know about what you might call the pituitary gland? When we talk about some of the dimensions that we have learned from yoga, how much of those are understood by studying the organ called the brain being just the anatomical part that helps us to be conscious, but the consciousness is much larger than the matter. I'm dealing with the matter, but I'm not dealing with the energy and the source behind it. And so the intense 6-day conversations where we began to look at the limitations of the brain, and digging into the nature of the mind, digging into the source of what gives us the power, what gives us the energy, what gives us the connection. That is where I began to rethink maybe what I'm looking at, so much of focus on physics and so much of focus on brain might be incomplete. It might not give me the depth of understanding that I'm seeking if I truly want to know how people learn, how people think, how people collaborate, how people are creative, motivated. I need to look at the inner dimensions, the inner transformation, and that, in addition to my uncle, my mother's cousin, one Sriram Murthy, he gave me Autobiography of a Yogi book, and that was in 1989. And as I was coming back from from India to United States, I ended up reading that book, over a 25 hour period. And then my wife was still in India. I had a chance to really reflect on the book and go back and reread some of the portions that got me to really think very differently about what's going on. So I immediately drove. It was Thanksgiving period in 1989. I ended up going to Yosemite and then stay in the Yosemite for about 3 days. There was snowfall, a first snowfall of the season. I was meditating pretty much non-stop for 3 days in Yosemite. And literally, that's when I began to connect the dots between what I learned early childhood and what I learned later. And in between, I had also met with a gentleman called Dr. Mohan Rao, who became very influential for next 30 years. He became my mentor in spiritual teacher, for lack of a better word, because literally he used to spend a large amount of time challenging, questioning, and reconnecting me to some of it. He had told me to look at Taittiriya Upanishad. He told me to look at Patanjali Yoga Sutras and read some of the stories of mystics like Kabir and some of them. So a combination of Autobiography of a Yogi, Patanjali Yoga Sutras, Taittiriya Upanishad, Kabir, over the next several months got me to believe that there is a lot more in our Vedantic and the spiritual wisdom. And by end of December, it was so clear in the next month that I decided to leave Apple at that time. And then I started in 1990, February, something called a Mithya Institute for Learning and Knowledge Architecture. Basically, calling it Mithya because I felt Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya was an important stuff. It was a very, very important statement. The nature of reality is the Brahman, but the world as a manifested reality is not an illusion like Maya, but it is longer than an illusion for us to discover experientially what it is. But at the same time, if you look at the time frame of the universe, it is mithya, it is unreal. But time frame of any single individual, it is real. So that is when I began to learn about the mithya sabdam. This whole word mithya sabdam anirvachaniya vachanam is what Vachaspati Misra said in several hundred years ago. Basically recognizing myth which we operate is coming from the root of mithya. So when we talk about myth, that means it appears to be a strong conviction, it appears to be the truth, but it's actually connected with a reality that is temporary, but longer than our experiential reality. So suddenly for me, I wanted to look at learning, thinking, creativity, all of them, by re-examining what you might call the Nyaya Shastra. The Kapila had written something on methods of knowledge, and the whole Tarka and Nyaya and how various things are divided. Got interested in Sankhya, got interested in, of course, yoga. Already I had spent a few months in yoga. and began to look at the Panchakoshas, the whole idea of how the from outward to inward journey, and looking at the individual Atman and then the Paramatma, Jivatma to Paramatma. So some of these became very thoughtful and conscious way, in almost like a scientific way.
Right.
I could move into spirituality, and that's how I began to re-examine my fundamental assumptions regarding being an atheist or agnostic. To I became much more curious and started doing, if I were to call, a scientific investigation into Vedanta and how they can be helpful to what you might call a unpack learning and knowing and thinking, so that I could design tools that augment human intelligence. Because in Apple, we were pretty much trying to create artificial intelligent tools 30 years ago, 31 years ago. So in some respects, my investigation into spirituality was to design new technology tools. But somewhere along the path in 1990s, very quickly, I moved away from designing technology tools and investigating Vedantic roots. And I went into Vedantic roots to later understand just the human development part. And much more quickly than I thought, I should say, that I actually started understanding human behavior, because I wanted to understand myself and I wanted to understand my family and relationships. And I never anymore was interested in user interface design or artificial intelligent tools, but I began to really look at how I learned. So that's where I began to see the brain research. That was pretty primitive brain research at that time, because we didn't have the fMRIs and we didn't have the PET scans and we didn't have some of it, because all the things that we could do was only if a person is sick. When you are doing a surgery, you could understand the brain, but the higher order cognitive functions like creativity, poetry writing, thinking, problem solving, we didn't know how the brain actually operates from the neurological perspective. But cognitive models that have come about, some of the things very quickly in 1990s, things moved, and I continued to follow both the cognitive behavioral approaches, brain approaches, neurological approaches, and I started comparing and contrasting those with the spiritual traditions. And then, for making my ends meet and put the food on the table, interestingly, instead of technological companies, because I was no longer doing user interface design or human computer interaction or artificial intelligence, I started doing more on human development. So companies like Boeing or Xerox or some of them started working with me on developing what you call adult learning programs, executive learning programs, and leadership development programs, creativity and innovation programs, and working with them on employee engagement and employee motivation programs. So without any background and without any MBA or psychology degree, by 1994, I actually started offering several workshops, and to a certain extent, I started doing interdisciplinary research into human development from philosophical, psychological, consciousness models, that I even became an adjunct professor in Saybrook University, and then started working with several graduate students and PhD students. That completely became an integrated world where the consciousness research from Vedanta, brain research from neurological and cognitive sciences, and the organizational research from the organizational behavior for me, those were three strands which kind of informed me, and I could use any of the models that was necessary to work with either organizational programs or to a certain extent coaching. Executive coaching was a field that was just developing in 1990, 1991. So I started doing coaching in 91 with some of the people, and essentially, so much of the coaching field evolved with many of the friends whom I had. So they began to evolve this field. So I learned with them, and I ended up becoming an executive coach and a business school professor. That's how my interesting evolution, reconnecting with spirituality and shaping my behavior and my profession from being a physicist and a computer scientist into human resources and organizational behavior.
So beautiful. Such an interesting story, enriched one, and definitely empowering to hear and be influenced. And I mean, you have already made an impact on me, how much of the Vedic wisdom you were holding on to it. It really was a very powerful source for you that you could go to anytime. And you created opportunities, and so many opportunities landed. I'm sure you really worked hard to really carry on that journey, make it enriching by the day. So nice. Thank you so much. And
a lot of grace, I should say.
Definitely.
I would love to take credit for whatever I learned or whatever I researched, but I think much more than what I did. I was at the right time, right place, and the opportunities were given. And for me to, without any degrees in psychology, without any business degrees, without necessarily a formal Vedic education in a Vedic school, for me to be given an opportunity to integrate. So I look at myself more as a product manager rather than a domain expert. I'm not a scholar in Vedanta. I'm not a scholar in brain research. Actually, know very little. But I'm an integrator. I am a guy who can connect the dots and then communicate it. So that's why probably in a business language, I might say I'm more of a product manager rather than engineer. I know how to package things in such a way it can communicate and help people to see different things. So that's what I ended up doing. And I'm grateful for the opportunity.
Very nice of you, and thank you. We are focusing on in this episode about your story because stories matter. So you took us to the coaching part of your career. Can you please shed some light on, again, traveling on the Vedic path? What were the insights, and how did it shape you in the coaching area field?
Probably the best way I could say is essentially I had a freedom because I don't come from a traditional organizational behavior or traditional business school background. So whenever my clients, whether they are business unit heads, whether they are senior executives like a C-suite executives, like a CIO or a CEO of a company, when they talk to me, I was listening to them from both common sense perspective and also looking at what they are saying from a customer or a stakeholder perspective, if I were to say, user of whatever they are saying and citizen of the society, so that means I was not bought into their mental models, nor I was angry at their mental models. I am a neutral, interested listener, and with compassion, with empathy, and with an openness to listen, as well as with a curiosity to see what they are saying, whether it will actually help me in understanding their predicament and their problems, and then I can actually support their development, because it is both about helping them to make better decisions, and in that process helping them to develop to be a better leader, better CEO, better, even more deeply, it is about becoming a better human being.
Okay, so this was all happening at the high end, the top level executive coaching. Okay.
So it was, whether it was the top level people whom I was working with. And then when I used to teach classes, see, there were three modes in which I engaged. One was one-on-one executive coaching. Second was working with a group of people, either in a classroom setting, where I was helping them to learn certain concepts, or I was being a facilitator, working with them, working with their processes, their strategy meeting, their leadership team meeting, or something else. But by giving them some guidelines, giving them some models, I could help them to bring clarity, or help them to develop strategy, or help them to come up with innovative ways to deal with whatever they have in front of them. So that was a second mode, teacher slash facilitator.
Right.
And the third mode was more of a evangelist, if you want to call, for a lack of a better word. But that happened when I was a keynote speaker, when I was speaking in conferences, when I had just 1 hour to talk to them. So these three modes required me to think from different angles. One was when I'll come from the conferences and keynote speech, there I had to inspire them. I had to help them to see something that they have not seen. At some level, I need to help them to tap into who they are in a very, very short period of time, through storytelling, through provoking thought provocation, through, in a subtle but important way, to challenge their assumptions and beliefs very quickly, so that they can see something that they have not seen before. They can actually connect with source of life, connect with source of spirituality, connect with something that is ethical, that is much more meaningful, and that is what you might call source of life. That's what I needed to do. So that process I called as igniting the genius within you. And what I meant by that genius within you is, if I were to put it in a Vedantic terms, who you are is not your body, is not your words, is not your mind. It is not even your individual soul, but you are the consciousness. Sivoham, we say, right? Siva eva aham. I am nothing but the Shiva. I am nothing but that auspiciousness. So I'm not anything that you can see. Saivaham nachadrusya vastu. In one of the shlokas, Shankaracharya says, Sa eva aham nachadrusya vastu. I am not the one that is seen. Drusya vastu, something it can be seen, something that can be heard, something that can be touched and felt and engaged. This body, this, mind. I'm not that. Sa eva aham. Who is that Sa? And that Sa is that consciousness. That, what you call Satyam Shivam Sundaram, if you want to call, or you want to call it like in a different ways, you can try to define consciousness. The way in which I looked at was, okay, how do I help them to see, just have a glimpse of who they are, glimpse of what they are. So the packaged Western language word became igniting the genius within, but that genius is nothing but universal consciousness, and that is reflected in you, in your individual mind, is something that you can see when you are open, when you can actually dig into. So that's all I needed to do in a keynote address. So for that, I began to look at how do I do that? Stories, as you just pointed out, stories have a way of providing evidence and creating a narrative so that you can shrink a whole lifetime of a person and one's own reflection, one's own what you might call a mananam and nididhyasanam. If you want to do, they need to listen. Sravanam is the first part. So I had the opportunity to create that first part of helping them to listen. So I began to tell stories, Upanishadic stories, reframed sometimes, and majority of the times I could tell them as it is if the audience were open to hearing the stories from some other Upanishads. And sometimes I might have to take a case study in the current context, raise that, put it under microscope, help them to see what was missing in that, and then I can use that as a metaphor to go deeper. So it is like literally whatever I have learned from the Nyaya, Nyaya Darsana, like for example, so if I needed to create 4 different ways in which I can communicate and establish a internal, what you might call a reference point. So how do I do that? Pratyaksha pramana. Give them some simple experiences. So even if they are in a keynote, I can ask them to say, close your eyes and think about which nostril are you breathing from. So then people will immediately try to say like this or like this. Then I say, is it possible for you without touching your nose, without closing your nostril? Can you actually pay attention to and see, are you breathing from both nostrils? Or are you breathing from only one nostril? Or are you breathing out from the same nostril that you breathe in? Or is it from a different breath? Within like a matter of few seconds, people realize, oh, number one, I never paid attention to this question, even though this is my life that I'm spending a lot of time and all my time actually.
Yes.
And I have no awareness of how do I breathe in? Am I breathing in through both nostrils? Maybe not. Maybe one nostril is dominant, or actually I'm only breathing from one nostril. Is it the same nostril that I'm breathing out? That seems to change. And also, I thought I breathe from right nostril in the morning, but now that in the evening I'm examining it, it's actually I'm breathing in from the left nostril. So I found that by just simple experiment, which took less than 30 seconds, got them to recognize most fundamental life-giving process that actually is keeping us alive is invisible to us. We have no awareness of what gives awareness. So that is the pratyaksha pramana. And there are some which I cannot give a pratyaksha pramana. I need to give them a kind of a question, challenge what they take it for granted. Because I cannot, for example, in a 45 minutes talk or a 60 minutes talk, literally create a major doubt, or I can convert them to become a believer of something which I'm trying to say. But if I can raise some doubt about something that they take for granted for, ever, just raising a question, that makes it very important. Like I could take very mundane and actually something that might really challenge them to say something like, do you know who your mother and father are? Simple. Of course, they say, what nonsense are you talking about? Of course, I know who my mother and father are. Okay. I believe that you can prove it for a fact your mother is a mother, but can you prove that your father is a father? They say, what nonsense are you talking about? Or this is not the forum, this is an organizational stuff. You are getting into very, very tricky situations and raising some questions which are probably not even acceptable in the traditional stuff. I just say, yeah, you're right. Your father is a belief, strong belief, strong conviction, and probably it is the truth. But your mother is the truth. Many of the things which we take for granted, it has the same father-mother relationship. Several of them, we take it for granted. As a matter of fact, if our father is not a father, we are in really big trouble. And they are in big trouble. And the whole family unit gets into a large amount of confusion. But why am I raising this? If you think you are in big trouble thinking about your father being a father or not, imagine the trouble that you get into when you realize who you think you are is not who you are. So the probably more firmer conviction than parents you have is about your own self. Of course, I believe in my experience. Of course, I know who I am. Of course, I am the person who is expert on myself. Are you? Really? So there is a listening you, there is a speaking you, there is an acting you, there is an observing you. What if these have got a lot more esoteric roles and esoteric ways in which you are connected? Who you are, probably, I'm not saying you are not this body, but you are beyond this body. And I'm not saying that your thoughts, your identity, your ego, your personality is not yourself, but I'm saying there is a lot more beyond that. So this is more like a projection on a television screen. But who you are is much more than what is projected. You have a lot more capabilities. Now, by this time, I have taken them into deep philosophy. I've taken them into Advaita. I've taken them into existential questioning. I'm questioning who their parents are and who they are. So that means in a 1 hour talk, actually, if I know what questions to raise, and if I know what stories to tell, that is the third one that comes up, Upamana. First is Pratyaksha Pramana, then Anumana Pramana, which is where I'm creating neti, not that approach to provoke people to recognize what they took for granted and where they stopped inquiry, where they took and bought the story lock, stock and barrel that I am this person, I am this psychological package, and I am this way, I will never change, and this is what it is, and I'm good in this, I'm not good in this, I'm bad in this, I will never get better. I keep getting into this trouble. This is my fate. This is my fortune. You buy into that. Maybe not. So then you can talk about the Upamana Pramana. That's when the narratives become extremely important. That's when the stories become important. If you tell the story without generating anumanam in them, the stories will become just something that is interesting. It's like movies we watch on Netflix or Amazon Prime or on the TV. We forget by the time we wake up next day. But imagine somebody gives you a series of questions that you need to answer while looking at the movie. And those are not easy for you to answer them and find out those. Sometimes you may have to watch the scene 2-3 times, and you may have to actually listen to the dialogue and try to see what are they saying versus what are they intending to say, what are they listening versus what are their actions, and subconscious, unconscious interpretations and how they are doing. If you have to do that, then you see that entertainment suddenly becomes edutainment.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So same way, narratives can be extraordinarily powerful if you connect it with direct experience, Pratyaksha Pramana, and giving them something to experiment, and then raising some questions, then giving them story. Then that is not going to just give you nice insight, but that insight now is lodged deeply into an inquiring, questioning, open mind that is like planting a seed deep into their consciousness. At that time, Sabda Pramana, at that time, focusing on this is what Vedanta says, this is what Bible says, this is what Quran says, suddenly makes a lot more sense. Because now you are not just reading to a person when they have so much going on in the process. Now you have helped them to unlearn and focus totally on something else. You do that. So I found this is the architecture which came straight from Nyaya Sastra on how to create a conversation, how to tell a story, or how to give a speech in a way that actually captivates somebody's attention enough that you are planting a seed in them, but it is not your seed, but it is a seed that is connected with who they are and how can they investigate their own origin story in a way, and how Vedanta or some of the spiritual scriptures can be useful for them to unfold whatever questions that are generating within them. Not dependence. It is not creating a cult. I'm not trying to help them to look at me as a teacher, but I'm helping them to provoke in such a way they can find their own inner teacher. So that became one approach of using the Vedantic wisdom that I'm gaining from the Darshana Shastra, one of the Shat Darshanas, and I could use it in keynote. Similarly, when I was doing longer term classroom stuff, how do I deal with them? Facilitate their meetings. How do I need to look for right opportunity to help them both unlearn some of the beliefs that they have, and then stay open long enough, create a gap between them so that there is an increased trust, there is a increased engagement with each other, and openness to listen to something that is not good for me, but at a deeper level that will transform me. So that means incremental good for the short term versus longer term good for the collective. Those type of things that I could provoke either in my executive education classes or facilitating meetings with the senior executives. All of these I could use in smaller doses and in small chunks when I was coaching, by really tapping into, unleashing, in all of these. Essentially, I'm working with 4 powers that we have. One, Chit Shakti, which is what we call the consciousness. Of course, the easiest way we could put it is as the being energy. We are being. We are beyond the personality, beyond the various identities that we have taken psychologically or ontologically or phenomenologically. We might recognize who we are, but ontology, that who are you? Who am I? What is my being? If you begin to really look at where is my life force, what is the causality, what, that is determining me to be right here, right now, what it is. Who am I at a deeper level? So if I can provoke that and help them to embrace and integrate all of who they are, then the journey is going to be significantly different. But for that to take place, sometimes I may have to work with their Gnana Shakti. Gnanam, I translate it as perspective. I don't translate it as data, information, knowledge, because in the 21st century, when we are living in the Silicon Valley, knowledge is very quickly looked at as next level of interpretation of information. But next level of interpretation of information is a very superficial, it's only a very, what you might call a mundane uh, way of thinking about gnanam. Knowledge is only a small portion of what we can do. Of course, in 19th century, 20th century, when people translated gnanam as knowledge, I understand that. But it's a lot more about the perspective that we have. It's a way, it's a mental model that we have.
Makes sense.
And that gives us when we change that, what do we know? What is our perspective? What is our worldview? That is something that becomes extremely important. That is the Gnana Shakti. So tapping into and helping them to develop that systemic viewing, looking at things from a 50,000 feet and being able to get down onto the ground to be able to make changes. That is what gives them the power. And the last two are Ichha Shakti and Kriya Shakti.
Yes.
Ichha Shakti is about, at some level, people have to say, I want that. People have to say, this is what I truly desire. Unless you ask for it, sankalpam you have to do. Unless you say, I am so and so, from this root of rishis, this roots of parentage that I come in, I am, like saying pravara and saying this is who I am. And in this time, Vedavara, Kalpek, Vaivasvata Manvantare, all of that, if you try to go. And then you need to be able to say the space. Where am I? What you call Bhartavarshe, Bhartakande. No, it is not. We are not. We are in Kapila Dvipe, America Kande. And Pacific Mahasamudra, what you might call should we say which Digbage, you need to say, are you on the side, east or north or south, you may have to specify, right?
Really bringing that consciousness where you are at the moment. Yes.
Who are you? Where are you? What time are you doing? At that time, you do the Sankalpa. There are rituals for it. There are ways to do it. When you do it, that aspiration, when it is fully, all ways, everything that you got, you say, I truly want to know. And of course, then comes the Kriya Shakti. Your ability to execute, your ability to perform, your ability to do. So ultimately, when I'm coaching, I'm trying to use these four: Chit Shakti, Gnana Shakti, Ichha Shakti, and Kriya Shakti.
Yes.
And pretty much what I'm doing is helping them to identify the role clarity, and recognize that, is it my intention? Is it the divine intention that I'm getting it done? Is it what you call, if it is mine for my selfish reason versus if it is the divine will being done through my instrumentation, there is a very different way. So at some level, I need to help people to, including myself, to hold my identity lightly, hold their identity and their ego, their role lightly, so that they become the instruments of the consciousness, instruments of the divine. Then we all become leaders of a very, very meaningful nature, and we all become exceptional in doing the best job that we can for the betterment of the world, betterment of the society, rather than becoming selfish pigs like we see some of the leaders in this world today. That's what I'm trying to do in coaching.
Beautiful. What an uplifting, delivery you have done. It is very impacting. And you have shown how much of the Vedic richness and the source, everything that you could draw from it, and how you could bring it to the contextual application. And I would like to know more about it, but focusing on your story. Thank you for sharing your coaching perspective. And moving on, where did it shape you further? How did it spread out in your rest of your life? If you can share.
I think I got really caught with my role. I began to take it pretty seriously that I need to integrate the Indian wisdom, Hindu wisdom, with the Western wisdom. West is bringing something extraordinary. The time and the space in which the transformation is taking place seems to be the West. But the Vedantic wisdom, the Hindu wisdom, the Indic wisdom that comes from India seems to have very important role to play in this particular time and space. It is no longer, even though the Silicon Valley is the place where I reside most of the time, but I have been spending 4 to 5 months, sometimes up to 6 months in India for past 30 years. So to bring whatever I can from India to West and from West to India. So I imagine myself to be a bridge for past 30 years of my work in this particular time. So in doing so, it literally helped me to create frameworks that parallel, they come from sometimes the Vedantic wisdom, and then go through the filter of cognitive sciences or brain sciences, and then compare and contrast it with the change models or models in the organizational behavior, corporate governance, or human development that are in the Western psychology. And whenever something that fits all the three and bridges the gaps, either in the Western models or in the brain models or in the application of principles, I have an opportunity to think and learn. And so I had an opportunity to play a small role in a variety of companies being transformed, both here and in India. In India, if you think about, there is a gentleman called Om Prakash Bhatt, who was the chairman of State Bank of India from 2006 through 2010, who truly transformed State Bank of India from being a also-ran company to something that reignited its past glory. And so like that, there have been companies in US, companies in Europe, companies in India that I had significant, what you might call an opportunity to make my own small difference here and there. So over the past 30 years, that's what I did. I did teach in variety of executive programs offered by different business schools, and I was a visiting professor or an adjunct professor in a large number of different kinds of schools in India, Europe, and United States. So probably about 60,000 people have gone through my programs in past 30 plus years. And I am grateful for that. So I decided to retire from it. From the perspective, retirement means it is more of a taking a vanaprastha. That means time has come for me to say, I don't need to do this for my own livelihood. I need to do this if I were to do it because I have an opportunity to raise money for a nonprofit, or I have an opportunity to contribute what I can contribute and allow other people to benefit financially. Because at some level, I decided my focus is no longer about taking care of my family. And from that part, I'm retired. But I still have a lot of energy and enthusiasm. So I work with nonprofits, a variety of nonprofits, whether it is North-South Foundation, Samskrita Bharati, or Yoga Bharati, or variety of organizations in India as well as in here. And I try to think and figure out a way in which I can contribute either the managerial and organizational work, or I can offer some programs or classes or coaching for these people to do. That's what I've been doing.
So beautiful. Thank you so much. Again, I've used all the adjectives: uplifting, enriching, enlightening, and really appreciate sharing.
You have to, these are all some things, a good opportunity. Just because I am a beautiful storyteller, I think the key it comes down to is recognizing this is all nice way of packaging. I'm only telling you only the good parts. I'm not telling you the bad parts. I'm not telling you where I failed. I haven't been telling you various struggles that I go through. But when I look at it in sum total, both the good things and the bad things, what I have failed and what I have learned, and what I'm still learning, where I'm still growing. If I were to look at it, I would say, I have been really fortunate. I have had a lot of blessings, and universe has been very kind to me, and I'm grateful for that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prasad Garu. And well, the journey I've traveled with you for the past 12 years, I would say, or so. And you've always been so gracious. You've helped me in several ways, sharing your knowledge, your experience. And now in the Smriti talks, I did not plan a script. It just went just like, extempore. But I knew exactly that you are going to bring so much of insights, wisdom to our viewers. I'm very grateful. And I feel strongly that it has been given away. And I'm sure the viewers are going to benefit from it. And in the next episodes, we'll go a bit deeper into the Vedantic knowledge, the body of knowledge, and if you can shed light, bring in more resources that can make a difference, we'll move on to those episodes later. Thank you much.
Namaste. And I appreciate
Namaste. It. Yes. Thank you all. Do visit back again. Prasad Garu is here. Stay tuned. Visit us at smriti.upaasana.net. Namaste.